Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening again. Welcome back. So this is installment 2 of 3 for our Q2 Field Manager Development Program. I have the pleasure today to introduce a special guest speaker. And based on Monday's conversations, this is really going to be a great follow-up. So I'm excited about this. If you can go to the next slide, please, Josh. Before we get to introducing our guest speaker, so this is what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about improving trust with your teams, right? And remote teams, right? This is GitLab. We're also going to talk about ways to promote organizational and team health as a follow-on from our session on Monday. And then time permitting, get into talking about tailoring the approach of how we communicate and work with team members that have different personalities and social styles. So yeah, it's my pleasure. I'll say a little bit more, but Dr. Jeb Hurley is with us today. Dr. Hurley is co-founder and CEO of Trust Metrics. And if you'll go to the next slide, Josh, I'm not going to read this one. I'll let you kind of peruse this while I say a few things about Dr. Hurley. I pulled from your LinkedIn profile, Dr. Hurley, a few things that others have said about you. And actually, before I do that, I want to highlight a few things on this slide. So Jeb comes with sales and product management background. He's co-founded, as you see, 3 software companies, and he's literally written a book about how to build high-performance teams. So incredible fit for like this quarter's focus and theme for manager development. So some of the things that Jeb's peers have said about him is the consummate technology entrepreneur. Another said, brilliant leader who relentlessly keeps the focus where it should be, the customer. And another that says, Jeb is an exceptional leader, business strategist, visionary, and mentor. He's passionate about understanding the customer perspective in order to drive innovation into products and services. His ability to build a strategy around what will drive the most revenue, along with ensuring customer satisfaction, is exceptional. So super, relevant to our world here. And the last thing I'll lead with, I loved, Jeb, the background image that you have in your LinkedIn profile. It's a quote from John Quincy Adams. I think it helps set the tone and the stage for today's session, or just to get us in the right mindset about exponential leadership as leaders of the field organization. And the quote is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jeb Hurley. He's going to lead us through a session on building trust with remote teams. Jeb, over to you.
Great, David. Thank you. The great thing about Zoom is you can't tell how much I'm blushing. So I appreciate that intro. Let me share my screen before I sort of jump into and can let me know that
got it.
When you can see that. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for that very gracious and flushing kind of introduction. And I equally welcome everyone this morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are in the GitLab world. And thanks, very much for joining me this morning here in Scottsdale, Arizona, as we look to connect the human dots, as I have on here, and look at how we as managers, as leaders, can really link trust, well-being, and performance on our teams, on our remote teams. And to sort of build on a little bit David's introduction, I really believe that based on a lot of years of experience and my research and work, that organizations really only thrive by developing leaders who are skilled at creating trust that can intrinsically motivate your people and ultimately excel at repairing and strengthening relationships on and between teams. Because, at the end of the day, this is about human and the human dots that we connect, whether they're, our colleagues, our customers, people we work with. The interesting thing is that while this may sound like common sense, too often I've found that it is rarely common practice. So what we're going to focus on during this session is turning common sense into common practice. And we'll do that by looking at the crucial role of trust in fostering organizational health and individual well-being. And this is especially true for people, which is the GitLab community, for people working remotely. And we're going to take a little bit of a twist on it, though. We're going to look at the neurobiology of trust and how you can use a little bit of knowledge. We're not going to turn everyone into behavioral scientists, but a little bit of knowledge to improve both well-being and performance on your teams. And as you are all part of the customer-facing, revenue growth-driven part of the remote GitLab, I'm going to give you, and I'm very sensitive to this, and as David read in my background, because I am very execution focused, I promise that everyone will walk away with a practical, real world approach to connecting these human dots between trust and performance. And we're going to sort of demonstrate that by using the data that you all provided on how people's behavior is impacting your work. So with that, just very briefly about me, because it's in the deck, and as David already gave quite a gracious, as I said, introduction. So I'm an executive entrepreneur, behavioral scientist, but really more relevant to I think the point David made, I've carried quota. And I've carried it both as an individual in a sales organization. I've carried it, when you sit in the CEO chair, you believe me, you carry quota, but you're carrying it for the entire organization. And most recently, I had the good fortune of spending 8 years in Asia, in Singapore. And I was working, part of that time, I was transforming the sales and sales enablement teams at HP in Asia. But as part of that, I carried full quota for sales and service across the Asia Pacific region. So, I lived that month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out. And for someone who wasn't very enthusiastic about school, I've actually spent a lot of time in classrooms, from studying economics and history, an MBA and a doctorate, as David had mentioned. And then sort of beyond the office, I've done a lot of work with nonprofits. I've been an adjunct professor, do a lot of mentoring, authored a couple of books, over 70 articles. And sort of outside all of that, I've spent many years in teaching and practicing in the martial arts. Love to ski and play golf. And when my wife can talk me into it, ballroom dance. Now, before we jump into the specifics of linking trust and performance, I'm going to just take 2 minutes, and I want us to listen to Simon Sinek's take, because he actually has a pretty good one on that connection between performance and trust.
I worked with the Navy SEALs, and I asked them, like, how do you pick like the guys that go on SEAL Team 6, right? Because they're the best, the best, the best, the best. And they drew a graph for me. And on one side, they wrote the word performance, and on the other side, they wrote the word trust. The way they define the terms is performance on the battlefield and performance off the battlefield. So this is your skills. This is, did you make your quarterly earnings, however you want to translate it, right? Performance, traditional. This is, how are you off the battlefield? What kind of person are you? The way they put it is, I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? This is what they told me. Nobody wants this person, the low performer of low trust, of course. Of course, everybody wants this person, the high performer of high trust, of course. What they learned is that this person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over this person. This is the highest performing organization on the planet, and this person is more important than this person. And the problem in business is we have lopsided metrics. We have 1,000,001 metrics to measure someone's performance and negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trustworthiness. And so what we end up doing is promoting or bonusing toxicity in our businesses, which is bad for the long game because it eventually destroys the whole organization. The irony is it's unbelievably easy to find these people. Go to any team and say, who's the asshole? And they will all point to the same person. Equally, if you go to any team and say, who do you trust more than anybody else? Who's always got your back? And when the chips are down, they will be there with you. They will also all point to the same person. It's the best gifted natural leader who's creating an environment for everybody else to succeed. And they may not be your most individual highest performer. But that person, you better keep them on your team.
What I love about that clip is the clarity. You know, you come away with this really strong sense of why trust is so important to performance. But what you don't get is how to make that connection. I found the answer to how leaders connect the dots between trust and performance, interestingly, in science, and specifically behavioral science. And behavioral science, what it does is it shows us how we can leverage people's neurobiology to reinforce and reward behaviors. And it actually is it's that simple in concept. And this is especially important when people are separated by cultures, by generations and time zones. Because the key to leading a diverse group of people remotely is to build relationships from a common denominator that scales. And that's in the neurobiology of trust. So now let's take a quick look at exactly how that actually works. So, you know, most people, most healthy people have a deeply embedded sense of what trust is or a violation of trust feels like. And, you know, we all place trust at the top of what's important to us at work and in our lives. You know, it's an essential character trait that we look for in our important relationships. But trust is also a catalyst, literally. So trust, and it's because building trust in relationships stimulates the production of the neurochemical oxytocin. And I want you to keep this molecular structure in mind because there's going to be a quiz at the end as to whether you understand what it is or can reproduce it. But oxytocin is powerful because it acts like a volume dial. So turning up and amplifying positive feelings and experiences all the way to 11. Teams with high trust feel more, they just feel more connected. They're like musicians. If you've ever watched a really good band playing, just riffing off of each other, intuitively knowing what their teammates need and how to deliver that reliably. Just a really quick sort of side story. During my doctoral research, which included working with a number of very elite teams, I spent an evening having dinner with some Israeli fighter pilots. And the most intriguing part of the story behind their journey of becoming one of the sort of the 1% of the 1% of aspiring applicants to become a pilot is the role that trust and relationships played in that process. So exceptional sort of physical and mental abilities are just table stakes, as you would imagine. But and throughout the course of the dinner, what struck me was how they talked about the ability to develop deep trust that's required to riff off of one another in milliseconds at supersonic speeds that distinguish the best, the very best from the rest of the people. And as one squad member said to me over dessert, he said, look, trust is what gives us the confidence that when we go to work, everybody comes home. And to me, that was an incredibly powerful statement because while, of course, what we do day to day in our corporate lives is quite different than what a SEAL team does or what a fighter squadron does. Where purpose comes from, our sense of it and the role trust plays, actually from a brain standpoint, from a neurobiology, is pretty much the same. And that's because healthy, trusting relationships, they're really vital to high performance because, and you will appreciate this at GitLab, they reinforce values. They also create well-being. And that's what enables people to work together safely, authentically, and to be fully engaged at work. And probably the third element of trust and the way it affects performance is one that people don't think of quite as often, but it's the fact that it's the antidote to toxic people and cultures. And that's why leaders who master managing team relationships and inspiring trust become really exceptional at delivering both peak performance and improving people's mental health and well-being on their team. Now, at the center of creating and maintaining those healthy and trusting relationships is a core behavioral science concept. And it's very simple. It's called the experience expectation dynamic. So interestingly, as humans, we have an expectation, literally, of every experience that we have. A lot of those are non-conscious or unconscious expectations, but we have them. And it's differences between our expectations of important relationships. So at work, that's going to be typically your manager, your boss, it's going to be your colleagues and teammates, or people you depend on other teams, versus our experiences that can create trust gaps. And trust gaps, very simply, those are the barriers that get in the way of healthy, trusting relationships, performance, and ultimately well-being for people. So, it can range from poor communications, unconscious biases, a sense that people are free riding on a team, and this can be particularly challenging in some remote teams, or something like low psychological safety, the way people feel about their ability to bring their whole selves to the team and to work. So let me give you a rather extreme example to exemplify that. Imagine that before your first Zoom call, you fix an espresso, and it's a blend that you haven't tried before. So you expect that you'll enjoy it, and instead it's not great. So think about that dynamic. You had an expectation, you had an experience, and there was a gap. You'll remember that gap so you don't go buy that blend again, but it's not likely to ruin your day. Now, you join the Zoom call with your colleagues, and you're blindsided when the manager of another group that you support calls you out for a small mistake that you made last week. So your expectation is that type of feedback is always done, consistent with the core values of the company. It's done respectfully, it's done one for one. So that dramatic gap with your experience is going to what? It's going to, first off, you're going to feel embarrassed, and likely you're going to then feel angry after the call. And what that manager has done is just created a serious trust gap. Trust gaps, what they do from a neurobiological standpoint is they literally block the release of the neurochemicals like oxytocin, the reward chemical, and they trigger cortisol, the stress chemical. And what typically happens is your engagement drops, and you're not likely to have, probably in reality, a very productive day, but certainly, in the hour or two after you have that kind of experience, you have this definite drop in how you feel about your work, and sort of particularly off of Zoom, you wonder around, what are people thinking, et cetera. When trust gaps aren't addressed over time, they harm team productivity and performance, along with people's mental and physical health and their overall well-being. And that's really critical to understand, because trust gaps, they are the number one reason and cause of disengagement and turnover. And if you've heard the cliche that people leave their boss, not their job, well, that's the essence of that experience expectation dynamic. Now, the solution to closing trust gaps is team relationship coaching. And that revolves around, again, keeping in mind the experience expectation dynamic, just three very simple steps. The first is, and fairly obviously, you've got to know what the gap is. So it's a matter of identifying gaps that are getting in the way of team performance and people's well-being. Then, very simply, working with your team to develop, and we're going to dive into this a little deeper, nudges that will change people's behaviors and ultimately close the trust gaps. Team relationship coaching as an approach or as part of your leader toolkit is incredibly powerful, because as trust grows, so does the flow of oxytocin, which reinforces and rewards trust building behavior. So if you think of it as building trust ladders in a team, every time you put a rung on the ladder, you raise people's expectations about the quality of the experience they're going to have. And then by delivering that experience, you reinforce that. And as humans, that just feels really good to be part of an organization, to be part of a team where, I'm constantly getting, it's oxytocin, it's dopamine. I'm constantly being rewarded every time, when I come in and I work with the folks in my team. So now I'm going to actually stop there for just a second. And before we move on to connecting the human dots between trust and performance using the data that you provided. And you can throw this into the chat or just come off mute and ask. But any questions around these couple of core, and I know I covered it quickly, but the core concepts around connecting trust, the way in which it influences behaviors, and how that ultimately creates well-being and performance.
Jeb,
Yeah.
Jeb, what are a couple ways that we as team leaders might actually identify gaps? Maybe a couple of techniques, especially in a remote environment where we can sense it, but we sort of need to quantify it. Otherwise, we're not going to probably be able to measure nudging and closing.
Yeah, and that's actually, we're going to see it because that's what we did with the trust metrics feedback tool. But setting that aside, because that's sort of the intersection of behavioral science and computer science. So there's definitely a tools-based approach to that. But just if I step back from a behavioral standpoint, if you go to that very simple mechanism of experience and expectation, that actually, from a neuropsychological standpoint, that's the core, the simplest, most fundamental definition of trust. Is that I have positive expectations about the experience I'm going to have with another human being, with another person. And so as a manager, simply getting in the habit of asking about, whether it's in one-on-ones or in team settings, and constantly checking in on where people are at around their expectations of you, of their team members, of other teams versus the experience they're having, that goes a long way to give you sort of this this predictive sense of where people are at. Quantifying it, you actually have to go into something that with some sort of mechanism that will provide quantification. But behaviorally, if you just focus on that dynamic, you'd be amazed at how far that can take you in sort of creating a radar where you get a sense of when things are early on, perhaps not where you'd like them to be with your team or an individual.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you find that trust is pretty general across the board, or can it be very personality based, as in one leader may have trust with a team and at 100% to the levels you're talking about, new leader comes in and that can change per dynamics, or how do you often view that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, and going back to that slide where I have had trust as a character trait and then trust as a catalyst. And this actually, because this is the power of bringing behavioral science into the equation. So trust as a character trait, absolutely, leader to leader, how their personality, and more importantly, how their behaviors and their level of intentionality around trust has a huge impact on their people and other people. So that there you get real variability. The way you smooth that variability in leaders and actually just in people is by focusing on trust as that catalyst. Because that's what, when you approach trust not as a and assume, well, actually, let me back up. The challenge with trust is that it's like it falls into the big emotion categories. It's like love and hate and sex. And, people tend to assume things about trust that often aren't true. And we do that because, and I'll give you a quick example. If I come to you and say, hey, I get some feedback that you could have probably communicated that idea a little better in the last call we had, I'm likely to get a thank you. And your body's reaction to that, typically is one of, it's actually a reward kind of response, or at least neutral. But if I come to you and say, hey, I got some feedback that people really don't trust you, how does that immediately feel? And I can tell you, because you get both an adrenal and a cortisol reaction. You literally, if somebody says that to you, unless you're kind of a psychopathic narcissist, and most of us aren't, fortunately, that you feel that, and it doesn't feel very good. So what we tend to do, we have a strong unconscious bias that people trust us, and we rarely test it. When you move trust to the level of a catalyst, when you say, hey, wait a second, I need to be intentional about trust. I need to check it regularly, because it's not just sort of how I'm behaving, it's literally how people are reacting to me. Then you go a long way to turning trust from something that is like, again, love, hate, I don't really want to bring it up at work, to something that you as a leader can use really effectively to fire up people's reward systems, and ultimately, it makes change easier and it drives performance. Make sense?
Hey, Jeb, Brene Brown talks about the power of vulnerability. How does that come in what you're talking about?
So vulnerability is I sort of love her work from the standpoint of she captures some of the human dynamics that ultimately it triggers people's neurobiology. It's how they feel. So you think about vulnerability. Vulnerability is an expression, it's a way in which you can build and trigger trust. I mean, it's kind of that simple, is that by being vulnerable in some situations, I trigger that response in others, and it's an empathy response, which is very powerful. So I think the thing that I've found with a lot of, whether it's, it can be growth mindset, it can be vulnerability, it can be, the difficult conversations, is to just remember that they're kind of like miles per gallon. Those are second order actions that, it's what it drives beneath it that actually really matters. So if vulnerability helps you with trust, then you will trigger some core neurobiology that will benefit you as a leader. I will tell you though, if you can flip it around, there are situations where people don't want you to be vulnerable. They want you to be strong. They want you to be, that's where that trust is going to come from, which is what makes it a second order. It's kind of a derivative personality attribute, as opposed to something that is a core neurobiological driver.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Cool. All right, so there's
Jeb,
no other.
Jeb,
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's 3 questions in the doc. If we have time to answer them real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think Ryan, you want to verbalize yours?
That would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So Jeb, you told a great example, which felt very real with those pictures in the Zoom backgrounds. Do you have a list of examples so we could know areas of the minefield that we should immediately stop doing?
Oh my goodness. But that's a little bit of a broad question from I think that, let me flip that around, because obviously, there's endless numbers as humans, right? Let me give you sort of a broader picture. The amazing thing about us as people is that we highly value, trust, for example, as a character trait. And yet we have innumerable ways. It's kind of like if you play golf, to mishit the shot. You only have to be off by a few degrees with some, and the ball goes goes hooks left. And I have a lot of experience with that. So, I think that the key is to actually flip it around, because if you try it gets very complex if you try and figure out all the things that you could go wrong. Instead, if you focus on, sort of the right way to make the shot. And this is what I mean by intentionality with trust. That if you approach, as a leader, if you approach your interactions with your team and other teams, your boss, with trust as a core, sort of you lead with trust and trust as that catalyst, experience versus expectation. If you enter into every interaction thinking about, hey, what's that person's expectation of me as their manager, as their colleague, as their friend, as their significant other, and this goes into our lives as well, versus the experience I'm about to deliver or I just delivered, that goes a long way in removing and reducing the number of errant shots.
Thank you.
Welcome. What's next?
Yeah, I've got one here. Thanks. Real quick, what if trust is, and it may play along with what you just talked about, but what if trust is gained and then lost at some point? You've done something to, upset, or you've lost that. How does one go about regaining that trust again? I don't know if we're going to get into that at all, but how does that happen?
Yeah, so I think that's where the again, to use a little bit of a metaphor, the trust ladder concept is a powerful one, because, and I'm going to focus specifically in the work environment, because when we take trust outside of the work environment, it gets a lot more complex, like in our personal relationships, because those are what are known as unbounded, in the sense that, when, it's your spouse, significant other, trust can take on all kinds of dimensions. But in a work environment, because we're there, you come into GitLab every day with a set of OKRs that, you have a group of people who are, you're there to accomplish those objectives and deliver those results. And so in that environment, the trust development, diminishing, or destruction process tends to be fairly a little more linear. And so the key to fixing, if trust will go up and down because we're human. And this was one of the things that, again, working with some of these elite teams, one of them said to me was, look, people think that we're super soldiers, and we're not. We're a super team. And the reason that we're a super team is because that we're really good at not being perfect people. We're really good at closing gaps. And that's the key to recovering trust is, and depending on what you've done, I mean, that can be a long road back, or that could be a quick road back, but it is consistently, building trust ladders with someone or with some team is you raise their expectations about what it is you are going to deliver as a leader, and then you deliver it, and you do that again. And you do that again. And that will, with time, and that will recover it. And the reason it does that is, again, it goes back to the neurobiology. Every time you do that, your people are getting a neurobiological, neurochemical reward that feels good. And we would rather feel good about our relationships at work than come to work every day, come onto our Zoom call saying, well, this totally sucks. That a cortisol driven environment is not only unhealthy, but, really it's something that we unconsciously avoid. And, it's what leads to mental health and wellness issues in organizations, is when it becomes a persistent issue. So again, to summarize that, that persistently, setting clear expectations of behaviors you deliver on is how you recover trust when invariably, and it happens to all of us, there's a dip.
Thank you.
All right, I think I got the last one for now. Hi, Jeb. So my question is for clarification. When we're talking about oxytocin,
Yep.
We're considering trust as a true social connection, right? I'm not a neuroscientist, but this stuff is very fascinating to me.
Yep.
So, so I struggle a little bit with this, right? So can we rely on a colleague and not have that social connection? Can we have like some blind trust? Can somebody just be reliable without getting those feelings from oxytocin, right? Like I feel like maybe people can refer to trust and it not being the way that it's being described here as really getting that oxytocin effect.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So there are a lot of, there a lot of ways to describe trust. And if you go into the literature, there's a lot of them, and there's, there's things known as fast trust and slow trust, and there's trust in romantic relationships. There's all kinds of dynamics to it. But there's a truism in neuroscience and behavioral science that neurobiology scales. And what that means is that our brain, our brain chemistry, our fundamental brain architecture is a human condition. Now, the degree to which we experience that, in a sort of a visceral way with a, sort of a massive dopamine oxytocin cocktail release versus a lighter trigger, that doesn't change. And there's a huge amount of brain science that shows in healthy brains, again, I'm taking out pathologies that are unhealthy, but in healthy brains, if you trust someone, if they are trustworthy, you are always getting little squirts of oxytocin. Now, that's not necessarily perceptible, and it's not a, I have to feel this deep trust with someone for them to deliver on this particular assignment. No, but and the way to exemplify that, because you can't actually measure it unless literally the way Paul Zak at the Claremont Graduate University, he's one of the foremost sort of researchers in this space. He literally drew blood regularly for people to measure this. But you can also sort of view it from the opposite, that if you don't have a cortisol response, in other words, you're interacting with someone, they have a critical deliverable, and you're not feeling in your stomach that this could be a problem, then your brain chemistry is actually doing the opposite. It's providing you with a comfort. And sometimes it is literally just comfort, as opposed to a, wow, this is the best, this is the best relationship on earth. It's just comfort. But the neurobiology, it scales.
Got it. Thank you. That makes sense.
You're welcome. Sure. Okay. Let's now sort of going back to the first question around sort of measuring and taking a look at what you guys did coming into today's session. So you took a trust metrics survey, and trust metrics, just very quick background. So the whole idea is that it blends neuroscience, which is kind of the front end, behavioral science and software. Ultimately, the goal is around building trust and breaking down silos, firing up the brain's reward system to make change stick. So let's take a quick look, and we're going to look, and I'm going to go through these quickly, and then we're going to do a little bit of an exercise together around nudges and how you actually can take the data that you've gotten and apply it. So these I'm just going to quickly summarize. So this was the first data set around, and this was the question around your experience with your expectation of support from your manager. And the really cool thing so just you glance at this, at the experience map, overall, people have high expectations of their manager, kind of going back to that dynamic, and positive experience. And that is a sign of a very healthy culture. And I will throw out kind of a compliment to the leaders and you guys managers at GitLab, because I will tell you, I look at a lot of these experience maps, and you guys are pretty exceptional in terms of, it is rare to see a manager, an anonymous manager feedback on sort of a broad group like this that has this kind of positive skew to it. So you guys should feel good about that. Solid relationship strength score, which is the RSS of 62, and that's on a -100 to +100 scale. So, a 62 puts, solidly up into the top quartile. And interestingly, so there's two distinct clusters. The first contains the most people, and it's concentrated around strong relationship. The second, and this is sort of how you read these maps, is a smaller group that have experienced a greater inconsistencies with their manager. And you look at the scatter plot as it sort of broadens out. And we'll see that reflected in the comments in just a second. And that, of course, is where there's some opportunity for improvement. So, if I were sitting as the head, overall, and I don't quite remember the GitLab structure, but as a chief revenue officer, or someone that sort of all of the managers in this organization report into, I would look at this and say, hey, I have got an incredibly strong core to build from. I've got a few key areas that I want to work on, but the wheels aren't coming off here in terms of where, at least based on this one data point of feedback. And we see that in the, as we move to, and I just grabbed a quick sample of 4 comments that were kind of representative, but it's sort of this range from, wow, I am incredibly lucky, the constructive feedback, goal setting. And then 2 comments around, hey, there's really not, assuming good intent here, which is definitely a trust diminishing kind of behavior, as well as the last one, subtle undercutting from my manager. And, that has left me unenthused. So, and again, we'll take these at face value, but both of those are indications of where you've got a situation. It could be individual, it could be the manager, but that trust is being diminished. And that, if not addressed, those are the kinds of things that will get you in trouble. Now, let's take a look, and this is a little bit of a different point of view around this is the cross-team map. Here, we see a much more set of mixed expectations of other teams. The map pattern itself and the relationship strength, the aggregate relationship strength are 28. Again, this isn't the wheels coming off, but it is an early predictor of growing friction and productivity loss in an organization. Because the more you think about as an organization grows, particularly rapidly grows, and you have more and more departments, more and more teams, your friction points change, and they shift from within team to cross team, intra team. And that's where growth starts to become expensive. Because as you get this breakdown and silos begin to form and inefficiencies creep in, it's not that you can't keep growing fast, but that growth starts to get expensive. And once again, you have 2 distinct clusters. This time, and I'll pull them both up. This time, the larger population is in the second cluster, the bottom, and that indicates a weakening of relationships that, as I just mentioned, if you leave that unchecked, you see a couple of things, and it'd be interesting when we get into because we're going to do our examples based on this data. My prediction would be that you have the number of silos increasing, that you have more processes being put in place. And that's often happens because people begin to substitute processes for actually what are people issues. Productivity begins to drop and turnover will begin to increase. And by the way, this is not unique. This is not uncommon during periods of high growth in any company. And I've seen it with, both in early stage startups through, mega companies. When a group or a division begins to go through high growth, you begin to see these kind of patterns. The key is that when you catch and correct these gaps early, they're much easier to fix, and they have an outsized impact on both people and performance when you don't allow those trust ladders to get broken down, but you say, hey, we see this, we're going to address it, and you bring them back up and repair them. You see that in a couple of the comments from collaborating openly, sharing success, lessons learned, some very good, and then some advice, better OKR alignment. Then some comments about silos, and then I like this last comment about expecting, this is an expectation about longstanding issues and an experience around, hey, we just got more issues, which obviously, and again, behaviorally, the read on that should be, from a leader standpoint, being intentional about trust, which as a catalyst, which is experience versus expectation. You've got to be saying to yourself, hey, what's going on here? That people have an expectation of things getting better, and they're not. And that's a crucial dynamic and skill set actually around intentionality with trust. Okay. So now what we're going to do before we get into just the broad AMA, before we get started, I'm developing a couple of nudges and talking about that based on the data. Let me just quickly talk about what they are and what they're not. So what nudges aren't are a list of action items that come out of, some data set. And you see this often with like engagement, and this is driving me nuts at HP in particular, because we did this biannual engagement thing. And then what would happen is all of the business leaders, we'd get these lists of the areas that needed to be improved, and we would develop 27 action items, and then they would go in the drawer for 6 months. Not entirely, but it's just overwhelming. Nudges are the opposite. They're small actions that help people think and behave differently, that have an outsized impact. And so for them to work, they should be, first off, you divide them, always divide nudges down into the smallest increment. It's kind of like getting into a diet or an exercise regime, going to the gym. If you go to the gym, you get your membership in January, you go the first time, you work out for 3 hours, you probably don't ever go back, because you feel, really, it's like I'm sore for a month. And, and so that's not the way. Nudges are about individual steps aligned with values. And this is crucially important. And given the importance of values at GitLab, it's an easy one to do, but it's aligned with values, and that this is about teams and team members holding themselves accountable for achieving those. So getting a team, and so by getting a team leader or team to take small steps in the direction of new behaviors, it makes it much more just like going to the gym. It makes you much more likely you're going to achieve it. And that's what makes nudges a powerful tool for improving performance and well-being. Nudges sit at the heart of behavioral change, building new habits, and kind of the neurobiology that drives it. Okay, so now I'm going to, so give me 1 second here, because I'm going to switch. We're going to switch to, let me know if you can see this. I probably need to, hold on. Yeah, let me just stop sharing and share again. Give me 1 second, guys. If I get the right screen up. Okay. So let me switch. I'm going to go to cross team. This is actually, this is what a manager, this is actually the manager, the manager workspace tool in Trust Metrics. Okay, so this is the map that the GitLab cross team, this is the map we had seen. And so I'm actually going to hold this up for just a second so you can see it. So what's kind of cool is we can, and we're not going to do this because if you were a manager, or if you were running, if you had this organization, you can kind of come in and we can bounce through, and it's all, as you can see, completely anonymous. People just simply get a number, but you can see a number. We can take a look at the various comments that folks are making. I can switch out of that and actually do the same thing where we can look at all of the comments, and again, compliment to GitLab, you guys as leaders, the quality of the feedback that you gave on what was this sort of simple exercise or quick exercise that's not something you're doing every day was absolutely outstanding, and gave me some rich feedback to work from. And so what I'd like to do, because there's a lot of data here, I went in and did 3 quick I sort of synthesized around the areas that I saw common patterns. So synthesis 1, 2, 3. We won't have an opportunity to. I'm going to really just focus on the first one and give you a sense of my my sense of what a nudge could be. But I want to open it up for, again, your thoughts. So the first one was I saw quite a few comments around the cross-team collaboration, best practices, around sales. You can read. I won't read through that, the whole thing on that first one, and balancing synchronous and asynchronous communication, silo busting. So, given what we just talked about, when you see that as if this was your team, you saw that type of feedback, give me a couple of sort of what you would consider to be sort of a behavioral change, a nudge that you think would be effective, that you would want to put in place for this group. And it doesn't have to be for, a group of 67, 70 people, but let's say this was your team of 10 and you were getting that type of feedback. Thoughts? And the type of feedback that we're analyzing right now is the synthesis one cross-team collaboration? That is correct, yeah. So that was the, and I put 2 others in there just to give you a sense of what if this were my organization, this is sort of how I would work it with my managers to say, hey, here's the synthesis of this data. What are we going to do about it? And so if we take the second line, just because it's a little bit shorter and probably easier. So it says, speaking up about uncertainty, flagging delays early, always assume positive intent. Is that an individual contributor or a manager saying, here's what I wish my boss knew that they should do differently? So in this instance, this is, remember, this is cross-team feedback. So so to create the scenario, this would be you as a manager, the feedback that let's say you're mid-manager, that you've gotten feedback from, say you have a group of 8 team leaders in your organization. This is the feedback they gave you about what's going on working with, let's say, the customer success team. Let's say you're sales enablement, or you're a field sales team, and this is what you got about from them giving you feedback on the customer success team, as an example. Got it. And then are there predefined nudges and we get to multiple choice, or are we coming up with them right now? No, you're coming up with them right now. That's is the art of, from a skill set development, this is the art of, from a leadership skill standpoint, getting good at this is really powerful. Thinking about, hey, what's the behavior I want to change, rather than, oh, we need to put a new report in place to fix this.
I'll take a crack at it.
Yeah, please.
So I represent the channel, right? And within that, there's obviously a lot of cross collaboration that needs to occur with the sales organization, customer success, and so forth. And so from a nudge standpoint, recognizing, something that may be affecting the channel as a whole with one of those other cross teams, what I would look to do is try to have a nudge suggestion incorporated in a all hands call. So we have one every Monday or every other Monday for public sector, in which through collaboration within the ASM leaders, explaining what we're trying to accomplish and whatever that specific challenge may be, or multiple ones. First vet it, and then be able to create like a discussion point within that team call in order to talk about the things that we want to incorporate for growth for our team as a whole. Yep. And the positive results that you'll get out of it in order to try to be able to reduce what that challenge might have been at first. And then gauge the results as they progress throughout the quarter.
Yep. Excellent. Any other thoughts on that one before I summarize it? Cool. Great.
I learned from a bad experience. Like I say, Jim Riley's next talking, so he's very aware of that.
Yeah, that's so that fantastic sort of breakdown of and how you would approach that. If you were in building a nudge, then sort of the art of reduction with that is to recognize that sort of that grouping is really around psychological safety, right? If I'm saying, hey, people aren't speaking up, we're not getting the kinds of the visibility around risks. And if I'm a manager, I'm saying, hey, whoa, this doesn't do me any good, because stuff can be incoming and my radar isn't picking it up. So the way you could characterize the nudge is that for the manager, it's being intentional and consistent in asking about areas of risk and exactly the scenario the way you described it, And the other part of the nudge that's very important, because remember, this is behavior, is that you praise the early warnings. Because what does tend to happen is often in meetings, when someone raises up, provides an early warning, we tend to react with, oh my goodness, this could be, and it's not an intentional, criticism of the person that brought it up. But if the tone turns negative right away, because it's a real business risk. So it's not that it could be very serious, but if you take just a second to recognize and praise someone for bringing a risk up early, having the courage to do that, and then panic, you change people's behavior because they got the praise. Everybody on the team heard the praise, and then it's like, okay, now the sirens go off because this is an issue. So just in nudge behaviors, make that little, if you're thinking about behavioral change, it's psychological safety. How do I reinforce safety, and then take the action on what was being raised, as an example. Make sense? Okay. So, and I know we're just quickly watching. We're coming up on the hour. So I'm going to. I won't. We won't dive into these other ones. Hopefully, that gave you a sense, though, of sort of taking the data set and the quantification of where risks are, in this case in cross team, synthesizing them, and then ultimately your goal is to create nudges. So with that, I'll actually stop sharing here, and we can come back. And first and foremost, want to thank you guys for the attention, the great questions, particularly in the earlier section. And then we do have a couple of minutes. So any other questions, comments, feedback?
Hey, Jeb, thanks for doing this for us. One of the things at GitLab is we pride ourselves on being a no matrix organization. So we really want to fight that as long as possible, but we recognize that inevitably we will become some sort of hybrid organization.
Yes.
So given our heavy emphasis on not having a matrix-based organization, should we, it seems like it's fairly indicative that we're kind of bumping up against some gaps of not being a matrix organization. So should we double down and focus on not being a matrix organization, and really try to keep things as in some way, shape, or form on a team, so there's not a lot of cross dependency? Or should we really be thinking about whether or not we're at a size where this is not feasible anymore?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Jeb, before you answer, Tim, what do you mean by matrix team?
I'll put a link in the documentation, or link to the handbook that everyone has access to click on.
Okay.
But essentially, we believe, so the very first thing I think is probably the most important. We believe everyone deserves to report exactly to one person that knows and understands what to do day to day. And we have a simple functional hierarchy. Everyone has one manager that is experienced in their subject matter. There are no matrix organizations or dotted lines. So team A, person from team A is not telling somebody from team B to do something else.
Yeah. I think that so I'll give you my, from having experience sort of across the spectrum, different forms of organizational design. In the end, it's people. And I think that there's some great, in fact, there's a great book that called Team of Teams. That's Stanley McChrystal. He headed up this joint special forces in Iraq and took down Al-Qaeda. And it's a great lesson in the reality of, as your organization grows and becomes more complex, you have choice points. And the one you should always choose is getting really good at leveraging the talent you've got in your organization. How you structure that doesn't, a matrix structure, with cross reporting it has some pluses, it has some, that the real, I think, opportunity is if you think in terms of you're building a team of teams, and teams need to learn how to collaborate in order to maximize the impact they have on the customer and in the marketplace. That does, you can maintain the integrity of your reporting system and how you do that. But what the skill set that I would suggest you want to build, and this is why trust becomes so important, is you want to build a skill set where you're really good at leveraging other groups, other teams in a responsive, customer-centric way. Then you can maintain the integrity of the model that, if this is, the core of GitLab, this is who you want to be, fantastic. But you better get good at leveraging and building a team of teams. If you don't, and it's a skill set to develop within your leadership, because if you don't, you will end up with just a bunch of silos and a lot of productivity loss, because you think about, as things move throughout the organization, that you get a lot of holes in the leaking buckets, basically. So you got to get good at that, but you definitely don't have to go the route of, well, I have to report to 11 people in order. No, you don't have to do that. But you better get good at working across team. That's why that cross team, that map you saw that we walked through, is so valuable for you guys, because believe me, there are early indicators of noise in the system, of loss that you're having. And if you don't address it now, you get at risk of either somebody saying we need a matrix because we need reporting, which I think often is the wrong answer. What you want is people getting good at closing gaps across teams. Make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Tim. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
All right, thanks everybody. Chad, this was awesome session, very thought-provoking. I know I'm going to watch it again because you got my wheels turning. So thank you for sharing that. Thanks everybody for the awesome questions and engagement. So and Jeb's going to join us for the second session later today. So we'll see you again later on. At this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So if anybody has another question, if Jeb may stick around, if you want to stay on the line and ask another question.
I'll hang on for 10 minutes. Yeah, if anybody has anything, we can. Yeah, I'll be on here, and again, just thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jeb. All right, so everybody, we'll take 10 minutes. So I've got 12:03 Eastern, so we'll get about 15 after the hour. We'll see everybody back at 15 after. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, Jeb.
Yeah, sure, Tim.
Given our size, it seems like there's a real temptation to start wanting to, like, the more I depend on another team and the more they don't deliver, I want to just bring all of those things that I depend on internally into my team.
Yes.
Is that a good kind of approach? Or like, how do you determine whether or not that is a healthy thing to do or not? Yeah,
well, I think that and of course there's never one right answer to those, because it's contextual. But I think that if you go back to the core sort of the core idea, one manager, so this unit is set up to accomplish purpose A.
Yep.
So think of it as, it's kind of like your own company. If you start bringing in things that are outside of the core competency, it's a competency model, right? And why are you doing that? If you're doing it because it fundamentally benefits the value you create for both your stakeholders, all your customers, your internal or external customers, then you're probably making the right decision.
Yep.
If you're doing it because there's a lack of capability in another team, then you're addressing the wrong problem. And this goes back to, how do you build, if you're really going to build a high performance culture, you don't, and I, we're studying SEAL teams, right? There's, believe me, they don't bring resources into, a SEAL team because another team, no, they fix the problem. But that requires a commitment on, on mid or upper management's part to say, hey, we are committed to this model. We're committed to best in class, leadership. And if there's a weakness, we're going to come and help fix it. So that would be my bias, is to, bring things in that are consistent with the value creation for the stakeholders that I'm responsible for, and push like crazy to get the level of support I need from elsewhere in the organization, and escalate it. Say, look, this is your boss's job, really, in some respects, is, look, either give me the resources if you're not going to work with another manager to fix this, or fix it.
Yep.
Because otherwise, you end up creating, again, think about the inefficiencies you just create when you go. If you try to fix a problem the other way, you create some real inefficiencies in the system.
So what I'm hearing is try to keep a single source of truth or a single source of kind of function for as long as possible. And when they're not solving the problem, then you need to determine whether or not it's a problem that they ought to be addressing and they're just not good at, and work with leadership to fix that problem. And when it's literally something that's so kind of specialized in your area, then maybe that's when you might want to bring it.
Because then your argument, you think about it from, I like to use, sort of like a venture capital model, which is, okay, for any asset you invest in to bring into your organization has a cost and a value creation potential to it. You need to be able to justify. You should be able to justify and say, well, I've invested in this capability to deliver this type of, and if it's duplicated somewhere else, then I'm saying, what do you? The other dimension of that, when I do a lot of leader development work. One of the things that I look for in, sort of people who really demonstrate that they're ready, to take on the next level, is their mindset around what you just described. Because if I've got a leader they may be very competent, but their response is always inward. It's give me this, that may be great, but that's not what I want at a division level. I need someone who's saying, wait a second, how do I optimize within this group? And it's a really good mindset, depending on your own aspirations. It's a good mindset to have to, balance those two, to say, wait a second, how do I help fix this over here to benefit the bigger organization while I've got OKRs to deliver? So, that's my focus. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jeb, I have a question as well.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, thanks for doing this. So, I was, the cross team feedback was really interesting to read. And, since I've been here at GitLab, I think, we're an all remote company. We're not going to grow in size in terms of parking lots or building sizes. We're going to grow in communication channels, number of handbook pages, number of Slack channels. That's what our growth kind of looks like. And I think that sort of inhibits cross-team collaboration because there's so much communication out there. I'm just curious, GitLab has a lot of high endeavors, and I think that'll continue to get bigger.
Yeah.
And erode cross-team, functionality and be more siloed. So curious to hear if you have you've seen that before with other companies, or any tips on maybe how to resolve that.
Well, I think that, it's interesting because I have seen it, because sometimes people forget that sort of if you're, let me use HP as an example, right? You've got a mega company that basically operates predominantly remote, in the sense that while there's big physical centers, it's a distributed, a global company with people having to work with teams all over the world all the time. And where I saw it break down the most, and it breaks down a lot, is when all of that becomes so heavy. And I think there are lessons in sort of the older organizations that came before, because GitLab is definitely new age, next gen. But the key is that I think, and Josh, this is really kind of pertinent to your role, is developing that skill set in cross-team collaboration and closing gaps is critical. And it's one that doesn't come naturally to, so when people become managers, most of the time they'll focus more on their area of expertise and what they're focused. And they're not being held accountable by the next level of management for their ability to prevent, noise and signal loss between teams. As soon as you begin tracking, like the data that we just did for you guys, you now see the noise in the system. The question is, from a learning and organizational development, okay, now what do I do about this? How do I start closing? Because you've got undeniable data that you've got gaps. What are you going to do about it? Because that's the skill set. And I think the opportunity that I believe you have at GitLab and other sort of all remote next gen companies is to start developing skills that, one of the things that drove me nuts at HP was no one had these skills. So the noise was horrendous. And that wasn't a skill set that was very strong, and no one was focused on it except maybe me. And then people looked at me like I was nuts. It's like, no, we don't get this. It's so valuable. If you can take that map and move it all up to the upper right, you will take an incredible amount of noise out and productivity into the system. And people are giving you the answer. They're saying, hey, here's where my gap is. How do you close it? Gap at a time.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's going to take some strong leadership support to move the ship in a different direction.
That's why the data is so powerful, because it's one thing if you just say, it's another thing when you put it in front of somebody and say, look, this is what our people are, this is what our managers are telling us, where we've got opportunities to get better.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, Jeb, if you'd be, when everybody gets back, if you're interested in kind of just closing out with a couple more thoughts I've gotten a couple pings of folks saying, hey, I could see this being good with my team. If you want to say a few words about that, you're welcome to, if that's of interest.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Got just a couple more minutes and then
we've got, I guess we've got Kenny's team and who else? And Sherrod's, right? Yeah, because we're working with Josh and we've got several groups actually where we did a pilot and then we're rolling out with them right now with Trust Metrics.
Cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's I think David, from a sales enablement standpoint, it's just something to think about in terms of how does the type of data help you help your key stakeholders, and the types of things you do from an enablement standpoint, where you see friction points and opportunities to close gaps.
Yeah. Hey, with one more minute, and maybe we take this offline, Jeb, but my observation too is like distrust is often fueled by the meaning that we as fallible individuals, apply to different situations, right? So from that crucial conversations, I know I'm guilty of it. Of when I'm at my best self, I catch myself and say, nope, assume positive intent. We talked about that earlier. Yeah. But inevitably, when we're not our best selves, we tell the victim, villain, helpless stories, and that leads to perhaps misattributed distrust. Other than the obvious of, go get good on crucial conversations, any other insights from your research or others that you'd share there that might be, interesting?
In what, just to make sure I understand the question, because in what sense?
So we were talking about, the importance of building trust. Well, the observation that, sometimes the distrust comes from something that's not even baked in reality.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So that's why, and again, to go back to that distinction between trust as a character trait, which is where we tend to go as humans. It's like, this is a big deal. Somebody doesn't trust, versus that trust as a catalyst. When you break trust down to that, hey, someone has an expectation. Maybe it's not a realistic expectation. Maybe that's what I need to adjust in order to close this gap. Or maybe it's something I need to do, creating a different experience. But basically, you take the heavy emotion out of it. And as a manager, as a leader, I make it very, I use this very simple dynamic and say, what is the expectation this person has of me? Is it realistic? Do I need to adjust it? Am I delivering? Once you move into that mode, what you've done is you've taken trust away from character. You've moved trust into its core neurobiological function. And it's so powerful because now you and I are operating at a much, it's not an emotional, I'm having a bad day kind of thing. It's just simply, hey, maybe that wasn't a realistic, David, expectation because of this. Let's close it. Let's close this gap. And when you begin to build that into the language, you take the temperature down, and while raising up the effectiveness of the engagement around getting these gaps closed. So that's really, I found that to be the key, is don't allow, it shouldn't be the big T trust. Yes, that's important as a character trait. It's integrity. Everybody at GitLab should have it. So when the trust we're talking about breaking down are those little things that happen that that become just annoying or cause me to, it's those things that we need to deal with, as opposed to, I had a major violation of trust.
Cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm assuming it's a couple minutes after 15 past the hour. So I'm going to make the assumption that folks are back. We're ready to get going. Before we move to part 2 of today's session, I wanted to give Jeb an opportunity to share just a little bit more of, hey, what are some potential next steps? And maybe, Jeb, you can share some of the engagements that you've got with other teams at GitLab, just to share that with the rest of the team.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And of course, and Josh is kind of he's the focal point for this. So, but yeah, we had the good, when Josh and I connected a while back, we did a couple of pilots with Jackie, and I won't remember last name, and Sherrod, 2 teams in the, I think they're both in Kenny's organization, or just Jackie is. Anyway, I'll mess that up. The point being that what we do with trust metrics, and again, I'll let Josh sort of be the focal point, although you can go to trust metrics or xmetrics, xmetrics.com. You can go to the website and sort of see it, but it's very simple. We have a 3-point of insight assessment. We're doing that with Kenny's organization right now, his direct reports and skip levels. And then there's an onboarding process with trust metrics that basically sets up the kind of data that you saw, that we walked through for your team or organization on takes 3 minutes. We typically will do 2 or 3 different types of, we can do well-being, we can do manager feedback cross team, and on a once a month frequency that has, so you're regularly getting this kind of undeniable data about people's experiences versus their expectation. And it sets up that simple little mechanism of see the gap, build the nudge, close the gap. And it's, trust metrics as a platform is designed to help teams. This is not a centralized tool. This literally is designed that, you and your team can take it and use it to get better all the time. That's the idea.
Awesome. Thank you. And I see, Josh, you've put a note or 2 in the Slack channel. You want to verbalize that?
Yeah. If you're interested in using, just reach out to me in the learning and development channel, and I'll get the ball rolling. But a lot of success with the teams that piloted it. And if you're looking to get more insight from the teams that you lead, Trust Metrics is a great tool. So let me know.
Thanks again, Jeb.
David, thank you. See you guys later this afternoon.
Sounds great.
All right, take care. All right, thank you, everybody. It's awesome.
Thanks, Jeb. Thanks, Elena.
So building on the whole topic, of trust, Josh, do you mind sharing the slides again? We'll lead into, I think everybody's met, but if not, Denise Parsonage. I'm sorry if I butchered that, Denise. Denise
Perfect.
Parsonage, is that right?
Yep.
So as you know, Carolyn Bednar is on maternity leave. Denise is filling in and providing awesome support. And so Josh and I were talking with Denise, and she's got a lot of experience in the area of trust as well. So invited her to please share her perspective on one of the topics that we touched upon in the pre-work, which is the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So Denise, over to you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Super excited to be here at GitLab, and I know I haven't met all of you, but I'm sure I will. This is week 3 for me, so early days in my GitLab journey, but love this model, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And so hoping that you have all had the chance to watch the video by Pat and learn about his great work. He's written multiple books, but the 5 dysfunctions of a team is really the foundation of his work. If you haven't read the book, I definitely encourage you to do so. It's one of my favorites, and it's a really easy read, and it puts really all the concepts that we've learned so far in this class into a fable about a business leadership team. And so, you know, what we've heard this morning and on Monday is really around that foundation of a team being trust. And so with the absence of trust, it means that teams are unwilling to be vulnerable or human with each other. And that creates weakness in terms of teams that aren't able to trust one another, can't admit mistakes and weaknesses. And if they have this absence of trust, you feel your vulnerability will be used against you. And that means that teams may hesitate to ask for help. They might spend a lot of time managing behaviors and appearances and hide their mistakes from one another, and maybe receive feedback poorly. And so then productive feedback is stifled. So without that trust, it's really unlikely that those team members, your team will bring forward those innovative ideas and also challenge authority and challenge difference of opinion. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. You know, once you have that trust, it's really about building on debate and healthy debate. And you know, if you have a fear of conflict, then you won't actually create that atmosphere within your team that really helps you learn as a group, learn to debate and learn from past mistakes, take action, and tap into everyone's experience in your team. So this requires, to be able to debate, you have to have that healthy conflict. And healthy conflict means that it's not personal, it's not unproductive arguing. It's around really being able to get to the best possible outcome. So Pat Lasani really outlines that debates can be extremely effective if the team is based on trust. And so your team is more likely to have to reach really optimal decision making if people disagree. And so encouraging the diversity of thought, you know, really exercising your inclusive leadership skills will help conjure up this feeling of safety and this ability to bring forward a mixture of opinions and experiences so that you can make really good business decisions. And then the next step in terms of you know, this model is around commitment. And so teams need to be committed and on the same page in order to succeed. That's, you know, table stakes, right? Like we have to show that commitment. But without, you can only be committed if there's no ambiguity around goals. And you have to have that buy-in into the plan. So I use the term often, listen, challenge, and commit. And so like you have that healthy debate, you challenge thinking, but ultimately you then commit and you commit to the plan. And so dysfunctional teams fail to achieve commitment and they kind of lumber from one decision to the next. So following on from commitment is this, is the avoidance of accountability. So you'll see a dysfunctional team will really duck the responsibility of calling out each other, either peers or, you know, the senior leaders on unproductive behavior or falling below standards. And so effective teams really hold each other accountable in order to correct problematic or counterproductive behavior and really maintain that high standard as a team. So all of these things are really foundational to then be able to focus on results. Without trust, without healthy debate, without that commitment and driving accountability in the team, it's very difficult to focus on outcomes and your key results. And if you have an inattention to results, it's dysfunctional because people then tend to focus on personal success, status, and ego before the team success. And so what this model talks about is really functioning teams are focusing on achieving results for the entire team. They have an ultimate mission, clear defined objectives, and they ask for help and they work with each other to achieve those results. So that's a little bit more kind of in depth about the model. Again, the book is fantastic. It really just, it's so true to life. And so if you haven't read it, please pick it up. Again, easy to find on Amazon, Audible. There's also the Table Group, which is an awesome resource online. And they have another tool that you could tap into, which is a kind of a team assessment that you can take to really get feedback from your team on, well, how do you think we as a team are performing against this model? You know, where do we have some gaps? Do we need to focus more on commitment as a team? Do we have an absence of trust? And then there's some tools also in the Table Group that can help you focus on closing those gaps. I have taught 5 dysfunctions at multiple companies, and I'm happy to help facilitate. I'm sure Josh as well. Any kind of discussions around this book or this tool with you or your team. So we'll go to the next slide to really talk about, you know, what you're seeing. So I'm super curious. Firstly, if this model resonates with you all, and then, you know, which of these dysfunctions maybe have you experienced in your own team here at GitLab or in other organizations, and what have you done to kind of move that dysfunction into a function, into a high-performing team?
I'm going to take off the screen share so we can see everyone's faces.
I'm not shy to call on people either. So who's gonna be first?
Hey, Denise, I'll contribute here. So I think the dysfunction around, you know, fear of debate can pop up here and there everywhere. I'm not saying it's super prevalent at GitLab or anywhere else, but it always comes up. And I think one of the reasons is because humans tend to be, we're emotional beings. So a lot of times the debate results in individuals holding on emotionally to their point of view. So the goal of the debate for a lot of people ends up being to prove my point, versus let's see how I can engage in meaningful dialogue. How can I listen, and how can I find out what are the weaknesses of my point of view? You know, like argue your weaknesses, and I think it's in our handbook somewhere where you should argue the straw person of your own you know, argument. So I think that it's prevalent. I've experienced it, and again, it always goes back to emotionally holding on to what you want to be the result, right?
Yeah. So as a leader, how can you encourage that debate and help people kind of be comfortable with that that, uncomfortableness really, of their ideas being challenged.
I think it comes down to practice, right? As trust is that foundation, so that's obviously important, facilitating the trust, but it's giving the opportunity for your team to collaborate together. And maybe it requires sometimes facilitation where you can ask a leading question that says like, hey, what data would help you be convinced that this is so? Like what data is missing? Or, and through facilitation and practice as a group, focus on the weaknesses in people's arguments and have just like a logical, calm conversation about those.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, one other way that I try to get debate going is, when someone puts out an idea, go, okay, remember, this is our goal. Does this get us there? And it kind of then opens the door to have, to continue the conversation on top of that idea. So it's not throwing the idea out, it's allowing the conversation on top. And sometimes you realize, oh, that really wasn't the right direction. And then you redirect without offending the person that came up with the original idea.
Yeah.
I've worked in organizations and with leaders in the past that have created, in terms of like the level 4 of accountability, created a more of like a vacuum of accountability. So it was very hard for them to be held accountable to anything based on kind of the power dynamic between the individual contributors and that leader. And I really think the onus is on the leader to always make themselves available to be held accountable to things, even if, they're minute or relatively meaningless. But as long as you are creating that feedback loop as a leader, I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And one thing that really helps with that is creating that that environment of trust and being vulnerable as a leader and human, right? Like we all make mistakes. We all, there's always an opportunity for everyone, no matter what level of position you are in. And so that trust really helps then people feeling safe to call each other out or hold each other accountable, which I think it all goes back to that foundation principle, really.
Denise, I've also observed, to Jonathan's point, we're humans, but even as humans that don't want to debate, people have different comfort levels with debate. And so I know some of the Lencioni stuff talks about constructive versus destructive conflict. I think one of the things I've learned before is like, hey, don't assume that everybody, defines constructive conflict in the same way. And so one of the things I've tried to do with my team is to try to avoid some past mistakes is, hey, have an open discussion, right? Talk about this model and just say, right, talk about the importance of conflict and debate and right, but also needing to make a decision, get to accountability, but then ask the team, right? Part of what we talked about last time is work and behavior norms. It's to say, all right, we're going to commit to constructive conflict. What does that look like? What does that not look like? And get some agreement on those, so that at least there's some explicit agreement of what that constructive conflict looks like, and then hold each other accountable to that.
Yeah, 100%. And not everyone, some people get triggered by the word conflict. And so really understanding your team and thinking about, what resonates, and is conflict the right word, or is debate or just discussion, it's really knowing your team and what fits as well.
So Denise, because you've taught this at other places, you seem like the right person to answer this question. This the pyramid looks eerily similar to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Meaning we can't really focus on transcendence of our being unless we've actually got, shelter, food, we're not in danger, et cetera. So is the idea that it really is, we're not going to be able to focus on results until we have trust down at the bottom? Is that a way to interpret the pyramid? I guess that's where I'm stuck.
So people can focus on results. It's just that you might not get the best results if you don't have those foundation building blocks below. Or you might focus on your own individual results versus the entire team's results. And so it's really just, to get the best results, the most functioning, high performing team, you need those building blocks. Just like, yes, it's similar. There's a lot of models with the triangle, right? But those foundational pieces that build you to get the very best at the top.
Got it. Thank
So
you.
I have a question, if I could, looking at that second pillar around conflict and seeing that it says fear of, but then I guess expected or best result is demand debate. To me, now this is just me personally and how I am, right? I'm definitely not afraid of debate. In fact, I probably need to like regress on that in certain aspects of my life in general. So when I see that, I go, okay, time out. I don't know that that's necessarily the message that they want. So can you kind of like, can you unpack what the expected result is by demanding debate, like what that means?
Yeah, so it's really about encouraging discussion and healthy debate around a subject and really being inclusive, that everyone's ideas should be part of you making a decision and gaining commitment to a plan or to an idea. And so one of the things that I think is something to remember as a leader is that let your team bring up their points of view before you put yours in, right? So you're encouraging their perspectives and their ideas. That's about being inclusive, really recognizing that, encouraging that healthy dialogue, you could say dialogue versus debate, is going to make the decision stronger because you've looked at the different perspectives, and you don't get stuck in groupthink, or it's, I've decided as the leader that this is the best way to go. So it's really encouraging that dialogue. Does that help?
Yeah, I like what you said about healthy dialogue. I actually, that resonates more with me. So thank you.
Yeah, because conflict feels negative, right? To a lot of people. Like there's, you can do all sorts of like social style assessments or personality assessments that might tell you I have a fear of conflict. And that's not, it's not conflict in terms of like the, butting heads conflict. It's more around encouraging dialogue, having healthy debate so that you can get all ideas on the table and then move forward.
Thank you.
What can happen if you don't encourage that is like there's a meeting after the meeting. And so people don't bring up their points of view in the meeting because they're scared. They don't have trust. They feel like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I say because so-and-so is going to trump my idea, whatever. And so then there's these people that are talking outside the meeting, that you want to avoid that. And so making sure that you're having that inclusive environment where people can have that healthy dialogue is what.
So that 5 minutes between meetings here is not for that. I'm kidding.
No, it's to
you aren't on that call. Oh, my bad.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this. Very insightful. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to. And if you have any questions or want to chat about it more, please ping me.
Josh, would you like to take us through? We've got 10 minutes left before we wrap up today's session.
I am on mute as I'm talking, so I know we've thrown a lot at you today. I've covered, I think that's 2 assessments now. It's trust metrics and now the 5 dysfunctions as a team. And I would love to hear from Michael Lutz, who's on the call, just to talk about what are some ways that you try to promote organizational and/or team health, and why is this important? I think this is a good way to close out our session today.
Yep, thank you, Josh. And I'm not a scientist or a doctor on all of these trust and neurological things, but I also recorded on a video, and we worked in the team to get the trust also from my management, but also for the team. And it's very important. The TAMs are very often, so the technical account managers are stuck in conversations with the customer, and they need to feel the trust from the organization and from me as a manager to go through these conversations and to manage them and not feel alone or feel a lack of performance if they call out or ask me to join a call or to move it into a different direction or to escalate things. And that's what we worked as a TAM management team to improve this and give our team members the trust, or fostering the trust that they can manage those situations. So to give them safety in customer calls. And another way what I implemented is basically on the collaboration piece. So if you read the handbook and the processes, the technical account managers are mostly assigned to one account. So one TAM is working on one account, which makes it a bit lonely. So all responsibility is based on one person. So in the EMEA team, we basically fostered a collaborative situation where on large complex accounts, or if we have a complex migration or infrastructure setup, we have multiple team members working for dedicated time on those accounts. And that worked quite well, and it gives the team, or the team is learning from each other on their skills. They know what the others can do, but it also relieves the single TAM in being responsible for our biggest account in EMEA. And another thing, it's also working cross-functional. I know Jonathan does not like to hear that, but we're also collaborating with the solution architects. I know that we need to reduce the TAM work on the solution architect side, but if you're working with one customer, and especially in transitioning from a pre-sales to a post-sales motion, it's working quite well if we have multiple GitLab team members working together until a task is solved and then move on to the next step. And that helps to reduce stress for individual team members. Yeah, that was a sample from our side. Any question?
I would just clarify, Michael, that I don't mind collaboration between the teams. It's more about an efficient handoff and transition, as you said.
Yep. I know. Thanks, Jonathan.
No, that was great. I think every team probably does this differently for each one of your team and what you're working on. So, thanks for sharing this, Michael. So real quick, and I'll let David chime in as well. I know we threw a ton at you, like I said earlier, and we were going to actually introduce another behavioral assessment to you all, but we felt, since we're 7 minutes down to the wire, and L&D, we've built a lot of resources for you all to leverage anytime. So reach out to us in the Learning and Development channel if you need support on how to build trust, how to, learn more about the 5 dysfunctions of the team. We're also going to introduce this new tool called Social Styles. Take a look at it async in the slides if you'd like. If you want to learn more, reach out to us. But, that's really it for today. I know there was a ton that we threw at you, and hopefully the call with Jeb was really insightful. I know I got a ton out of the data that we gathered. Definitely try to take some time to review the survey results. There's a lot of really good nuggets of information in there. David, anything else left to add before we close out?
Yeah, well, last couple of minutes, just love group share. Hey, what's one thing you took away from today's session that you can begin to put into action?
Any training can be created through Simon Sinek's methods, and we can build on top of it. That was one of my big takeaways.
Hey, David, I really like the nudge concept. That was really useful.
Yeah, Alan, I was just about to say the same thing. I love that nudge concept, and Chris making the suggestion that it's something that we kind of create as a tool here. It's only going to get faster. We're only going to continue to keep growing, and the opportunities for us to veer off the path probably will increase, and providing opportunities for all of us to, one, recognize it and to get back to center, I think is a great idea.
I think there's going to be a nudge emoji that I'll be seeing in Slack where people are pushing me to do some things. So no, it was good stuff. Thank you for putting this together.
It's already in there, Adam. You just keep ignoring it.
Well, so we got to build some trust then, Tim. And we'll
Where
work
are
on that.
you in my pyramid? I don't
Right.
think we have time.
Just as long as that nudge doesn't have the Michelle face on it, I'll be happy.
There are too many creative people on this call, Michelle. You shouldn't have that idea.
Sorry.
Well, thank you, everyone. For those that didn't chime in, I encourage you to think about to yourself, what were your key takeaways today? What actions do you want to take from this? We look forward to getting back together with you. Our third of 3 sessions is 1 week from today, so Wednesday, June 2nd, where we'll talk about providing feedback. So please make sure, if you haven't already, complete module 3 of the pre-work to make the best use of our time. And we'll have some good interactive fun and learning in a week. We'll give you the rest of the time back. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David, Josh, appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
So.